Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I'm Harry, and today we have another top 10 list for you all. Today I'll be covering my top 10 route/network building games. And these are games, sometimes they're referred to as connection games, where players are using some type of mechanism in order to connect different spots on a board spatially. And this makes for a network of connections that benefit the player in different ways. Either it gets them victory points straightforward, it gets them access to a location on the board, it gets them bonus points, or maybe it even entitles them to certain resources, right? So this is basically it. These games all have a strong spatial element. Quite often they have a map of some type, even though sometimes there are more abstracted type of route network building games. So without any further explanations, actually one further explanation, as I rank this from 10 to 1, it's not necessarily my favorite games or the games I like most that are taking preference or priority, but really what I'm focusing on is how important the route network building is to the game, and then on that basis whether or not I like the game a lot or a little bit less. All right, so with no further ado, my number 10 route network building game of all time is Kingdom Builder, designed by Donald X. Vaccarino and published by Queen's Games. This is a game that I enjoy a lot, but I have to admit, as far as the route network building is concerned, it's actually pretty light. You are connecting, theoretically, different spots as you place these settlements. You have a terrain card, only a hand of one, that you play down at the beginning of the turn, and it allows you to place down 3 settlements in a terrain or on terrain that corresponds with the card you just played. But there's a lot of rules and restrictions. For example, the biggest rule in this game is an adjacency rule, where if you already have a presence on the board and you can build adjacent to that presence, you must build adjacent to the presence. So you really have to, anticipate future and upcoming moves every time you play down one of these cards, or else you can really trap yourself. But as far as the route network is concerned, the building, there are a bunch of kingdom cards, which are your scoring condition cards that you shuffle and draw at the beginning of the game. You always have 3 different ones, so there's a lot of variety as far as scoring is concerned. And a few of those kingdom cards actually have to do with route network building, which is why this is ranked number 10, because it's an excellent game, it's an awesome game, and it does feel like you're building routes, whether or not they're relevant to your scoring or not. But yes, there are some kingdom cards that make the concept of connecting certain spots on the board even more advantageous and beneficial to the players. And that's why this is my number 10 route network building game of all time, Kingdom Builder. And now we move on to my number 9, and that is Through the Desert, designed by Reiner Knizia and Z-Man Games. Now, this is an abstract game. It's kind of like Reiner Knizia's answer to the classic game Go, but with some sort of theme, right? The idea of, camels and caravans in the desert and reaching water spots to feed your caravan, and, making it to oases to further provide for your caravan. And all these things score you points in different ways, but you can block out your opponent in certain cases. Very much like Go, you can surround them. That pretty much cuts them off, or cuts that particular caravan off from connecting to any source of water or supply. And you also score points for those spaces within that enclosement that you created. Now, this is a brilliant, wonderful game. I must admit, I've grown tired of this game a little bit over the years. I definitely like Kingdom Builder better overall as a game than Through the Desert. But because, unlike Kingdom Builder, where only certain kingdom cards make the route network building relevant, here it is always relevant. You really want to try your best to, first of all, prevent players from enclosing you and cutting you off. You're also kind of racing to certain spots. Sometimes you and another player's caravan are both racing to a particular spot. And you can kind of map out who's going to get to that spot first, but it's hard to anticipate your opponent's decisions because you're always picking a certain amount of camels, and you have all the different colors to pick from. So yes, your opponent may, go all in and try to beat you to the race to that particular oasis or water spot, But instead, they might actually pick camels from another color and build up elsewhere. So it's a little bit hard sometimes to anticipate your opponent. You don't know what they're gonna do. But there's lots of options, and you score for majorities in all the different caravans. It's a cool game. It's a brilliant game. It's an aesthetically pleasing and satisfying game. If you like abstract strategy games, this is pretty much as good as it gets. My number 9 route network building game of all time, Through the Desert. Now we move on to my number 8. And my number 8 is Paris Connection. And this is a very super light train stock market themed game where players are expanding the influence of 6 different companies represented by different colors. And as you create these connections, these routes that link the companies to certain cities, it increases the value of that train company or that train color. And some cities, not all cities are created equal, some cities are more valuable than others, therefore they increase the value of the train by even more. And finally, the end game trigger is Marseille in France, and you're trying to ultimately connect one company. Only one company will probably make it to Marseille. And when you, actually only one company will make it to Marseille because that's a hard end game trigger. And that will give them even more points than any of the other cities. So it could be a real catch-up mechanism for a company that perhaps might be falling behind. Now, what's interesting is the way the shares are represented are by the same meeple train pieces that you're using to place on the board. You have a depot of all the different colors with an allotment of all these different train meeples, and you have a choice. You could either put one on the map to extend the influence and increase the value of said train company, or you can trade in one of your shares in one of the respective colors for 1 or 2 shares in another color, right? So sometimes you find yourself in a situation where you want to pick up a share, but you're not quite sure how valuable that train company is going to be because there's not many trains, the same shares, to put back on the board. But that can change over the course of the game as players trade in their shares, and now all of a sudden that color that you thought would not grow or expand its influence on the board, now that becomes an option. Really fun, really cool, super duper duper light. I do think that as time progresses, it's probably not going to endure the test of time, and it probably won't be as high as number 8. But I find it a little charming and elegant and cool to introduce this style of game, a stock market concept, to non-gamers or casual gamers as well. My number 8 route network building game of all time, Paris Connection. And now we move on to my number 7. And my number 7 is Wisdom of Solomon, designed by Philip Dubarry and published by Fantasio Games and Funhill Games. And this game, it's a Bible-themed worker placement game with some route network building going on the side in the map of Israel. Now, first of all, disclaimer, if you're not into this type of theme for a board game, the theme is not as relevant to the gameplay as you would first imagine, right? You do have a map of Israel, but other than that, you can play this game even if you're not into the Bible theme, right? Now, what's interesting is it has a great worker placement mechanism with all these different spots that are very tight and adjust according to the player count. I always like when games factor in player counts, especially for worker placement, right? Because when you don't factor that in, it could become too loose, right? So there is that. But besides the amazing spaces that you have here on the left side of the board for your worker placement, you also have the map of Israel, which also comes with its own worker placement spots where you go to recruit or gather resources. But as the game progresses, you are building routes, you're building roads that connect regions to one another, so that in the future, when you use those worker placement spots, instead of just gathering the region or the resource that given region produces, you're also going to gather the resources of all the regions that are linked to that network by all of these roads, right? So that can exponentially accumulate resources for you, right? So it's a very methodical process of trying to figure out what are the most optimal locations to expand your network, building customs houses, because you need to have either a custom house present in that network or have none of your opponents have a custom house present in that network. But other than that, you're trying to geographically and spatially interact with this map, place those roads in the most logical and convenient of spaces to connect to those most optimal locations, And in future turns, again, like, as I said, when you place your worker down, gather more resources than you would have otherwise. Really cool, neat side mechanism in the game, but so crucial and so important for the gathering of those resources. My number 7 route network building game of all time, Wisdom of Solomon. And now we move on to my number 6 route network building game of all time, and that is Taj Mahal, designed by Reiner Knizia and published by Z-Man Games. At least this edition is. This is a beautiful, gorgeous edition. A map of India divided into 12 regions. Players are playing this kind of, it's auction bidding in disguise. People don't realize that, but you're playing cards that have different symbols or imagery of different court officers. You got the vizier, and you got the general, and you got the princess, and you got the monk. You even got the mogul himself. And as you place these cards down, each turn you can either drop out of the bid, or you can add additional cards to the current bid to have more of those specific symbols, because you're going to win the favor of these court officers. And for each court officer that you win the favor of, you get to place one of your color-coded palaces in that current region that we're in, because you're going through the 12 regions one at a time. What's really neat is no matter how many palaces you build in that given region, you're only going to score 1 point. However, if you were crafty enough to create this intricate system, this intricate network of palaces that connect through the different and previous regions, when you score that palace, or when you place that palace, you're not going to score just that 1 point. You're going to score 1 additional point for each and every region through which there's a contiguous connection of your colored palaces. That is awesome. So where you place your palaces matter, because you know that right now you are in the number 4 region, and number 5, you know where all the regions are as soon as the game starts. Number 5 is on the other side of the country, but later on number 7 is adjacent to the number 4 region. So I want to place it on the corner of this number 4 region, so that in the future I will try my best to win and prioritize region number 7 in order to build it on its corner and again create that network. Now, this game is really, really tight, and it's tough to build these extensive, massively long connections. And let's be real, there's only 12 regions, and you're not going to have priority as often as you would like. It's a very competitive game, but you'd be surprised. There are games where you end up building 3 or 4, maybe even 5 connecting regions if you are, again, crafty and tactful enough to map out and decide, long term, which regions are you going to commit yourself to winning those auctions in order to prioritize those palaces and get the best locations. Really cool. Lots of nice resource management going on in this game. Lots of other cool elements. It combines, some wonderful elements that or mechanisms that I enjoy in gaming: auction bidding, route network building, like I said, resource management, and this cumulative resource acquisition, where when you gather a resource of a specific type, if you already have some in your supply, you score them all over again, right? A la Castles of Burgundy, which came after this game, Taj Mahal. This is my number 6 route network building game of all time, Taj Mahal. Now we move on to the top 5, the cream of the crop. And my number 5 is a game that people won't think of when they think of route network building, but it absolutely has that mechanism, and that is Cyclades, designed by Bruno Cathala and Ludovic Mablanc, published by Madigo Games. One of my absolute favorite games of all time. This game is a Greek-themed game, war kind of based game, civilization-based game, where players each control one of the different tribes or groups of ancient Greece, right? And they're vying for control of the Cyclades Islands. And basically, you are also trying to win the favor of the different gods from the Greek pantheon. You got Zeus and Poseidon and Apollo, and you got Athena, and you got Ares, right? And each of them benefit you in different ways, right? But what's cool is a big component of this game is warfare through the favor of Ares. You're marching your units into different isles and trying to fight off whatever troops of your opposition might be there through the rolling of the die. However, in order to be able to attack efficiently, and in order to be able to retreat efficiently for when those attacks fail, you need to have a nice system of routes that are constructed by your naval fleets, right? You have your different ship miniatures here. You don't only have troops, which are like your armies. You also have navy ships that you place that connect islands to island. Because if you don't have a route to follow to get you from one island to another, then it's not a legal move, right? Even conquering an uninhabited island, you need to have a network or a route of ships that connect you from one island to that unoccupied island. So it's really, really cool. You really need to think that through. Now, this game is a very conflict-oriented game, so players can absolutely do their best to eliminate and hinder your route building, right? Because they can attack with their Navy ships, they can attack your Navy ships and disconnect you from places, right? So a lot of that goes on. You're constantly factoring those things in. You're constantly rebuilding old routes or creating new ones in response to old ones that have been demolished. Really, really cool. But again, even though it seems like such a minor mechanism, when you really think about it, 1/5 of the game, you have 5 gods, and Apollo kind of doesn't really count. So you really have 4 gods, and one of them is Poseidon, who basically helps you create these routes. So it's 25% of the game. And again, it's so Ares power, which is the invasion into other lands, occupied or otherwise, his power will be rendered null and void if it weren't for the route network building. So you could say that it's almost 50% of the game. So because of that, I rank it very highly. My number 5 route network building game of all time, Cyclades. And now we move on to my number 4. My number 4 route network building game of all time is Airlines Europe, designed by Alan Moon and published by Rio Grande Games. And this game, the route network building is not such a matter of connecting specific spots to others, but there is this ultimate goal for some of the airlines. Some of the airlines, there's a bunch of different airline companies, color-coded, but some of them have an additional way, because every time you add an additional route to an airline's company, they increase in value, similar to a game like Paris Connection, which I mentioned earlier. And this is definitely a stock market game. You're trying to acquire stocks through card drafting of the different color-coded companies. But some companies can actually increase in value even further if you connect them to particular final destinations that are scattered throughout the board and are color-coded to correspond with those colors. If you can get White's headquarters to connect a contiguous line of routes that ends up all the way in the final destination of White, which will be marked off on the board, then all of a sudden you increase its value like 8-fold, right? Or something like that, some drastic things. But all along, you're navigating all the different routes that may or may not be in your way, because from each city to another city, there's a limited amount of licenses for connection, right? You may be able to connect 1 in some cases, 2, even 3, but never more than that. And after that, you know, you're done. You're gonna have to find a longer route, right? A roundabout way to get into the same place. So factoring all these things are very important. So you're building simple routes in order to increase their value, but ultimately you do have that final destination, which increases some of these companies' value by even more. And that is the bread and butter of the game. And of course, manipulating the stock to your advantage to have as many shares as you can for the ones that you think are going to be cashing out the most at the end of the game. My number 4 route network building game of all time, Airlines Europe. And now we move on to my number 3. And my number 3 route network building game of all time is Steam, designed by Martin Wallace and published by Mayfair Games. Rails to Riches. This game is Martin Wallace's reiteration of the older and more, I guess, complex and mean Steam, right? And in this game, it's a pickup and delivery game. There's a map of New England, and players are creating routes through the use of these hexagonal rail tiles, right? So you got these tiles that represent railroads, and there's a bunch of different configurations of railroads. Sometimes you have a straight railroad, sometimes you have a curvy railroad, sometimes you have an intersecting railroad, sometimes you have a fork railroad, right? And you're trying to, as you lay the rails down, as you lay the tracks down, you're trying to find the rails or the track tiles that are most beneficial to you, that will connect to your space of origin, but also connect to other cities, because all of the cities produce different color-coded goods, and you're trying to get those goods back to a city that corresponds to the color of that good, and that good is indicated or represented by a small little tiny colored cube, right? So if you pick up a yellow cube in a purple city, you want to transport that yellow cube back to a yellow city in order to score either points or increase your income, right? Because you need to have income in this game, because if you don't have income, you won't be able to buy those tracks. You won't be able to buy some of the additional features that this game provides. For example, the improvement of your locomotive. You need to improve your locomotive as the game progresses, because your locomotive starts at 1, right? So that means you're able to transport goods or pick up and deliver goods from one city to one city that connects to it, like through one connection. But if you advance all the way to 6, which is your maximum, then you can transport goods through a connection, a successive connection of 6 cities, and ultimately culminating in a spot or a city that corresponds with the cube you're trying to transport. But the cool thing is, the more cities or the more connections through which you travel each time you pick up and deliver, the more points, and again, or income you get for that round. And this is an awesome game, because you do deal with debt, especially early on in the game, and you're trying to balance it. You don't want to be too indebted, because if you are, you might never really get out of the hole. You might really never get many points. But it's fun factoring in what potential routes other people might try to use, and you do get to utilize other people's routes, but you can never pick up and deliver if you're using someone else's routes more than you're using your route for that delivery. So if I'm using 2 of my connections, I cannot use more than 2 connections of somebody else's for any given delivery. So factoring all these things in is really cool. There's a real cool turn order mechanism where, based on an auction that you have at the beginning of the round, you determine what specific action you're going to have that gives you a slight advantage to all your opponents and the others, because there's like 5 or 6 different actions you choose from, and each of them has a slight advantage. And then based on the ones you decided, that'll determine who goes first or bids the following turn as well. Some really cool mechanisms in this game. I love the map. I love, again, the route network building and the tile placement with the tiles that represent the track. Really cool. My number 3 route network building game of all time, Steam. And now my number 2. And my number 2 is probably my favorite game out of all of these 10. But I have to admit that my number 1, the route network building, is more crucial and essential to it. So my number 2 route network building game of all time is Power Grid, designed by Freedom and Freeze and published by Rio Grande Games. This is an amazing game. I talk about it quite often in the channel. Perhaps not quite the looker that some other games might be, but it's just beautiful. Players are trying to create a network of cities to which they will supply power through their power plants, which they are purchasing throughout the game, through their resources, which are the fuel that each of the respective power plants need, that they'll also be purchasing throughout the game, managing and manipulating the supply and demand market that the game has, all while budgeting the cash that they have. That is not part of the winning condition. Your cash is irrelevant. It might serve as a tiebreaker, but other than that, your cash is just a means to an end. And the cool thing about this game is, and the reason why the route network building is so important, is because, first of all, you need to build these routes because these cities represent the locations that you can supply power for. So even if you have an amazing amount of power plants that could supply power for lots of cities, if you don't have lots of cities to supply that power to, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the game, at the end of the day, your final score will be the common denominator between how many cities your power plants can supply power to and how many cities you actually own, right? Or how many cities you actually have established your network in. But the cool thing about this game is that it can get very vicious with the route network building, because you could create networks in a fashion that really cut off and block off opponents to the point where they have to spend more money than you to build through your network and finally establish another location or another city that's kind of far from where their headquarters or their base of operations is. So again, that part is really, really neat, because it's a way to make your opponent spend more money doing that, because they're going to need those cities. But the money that's being spent on those cities is money that they'll not have for the purchasing of the power plants and or resources. So that is really, really cool. And just the way you manipulate the different maps, the different sections of the map, because their connection prices are differently. So you might go to a place, you might try to establish yourself early on in places that are very, very expensive, the connection prices, or you might establish yourself in a place where the connections are very cheap and leave the expensive one to your opponents. Really cool. Lots of amazing mechanisms combined in this game, but the route network building is absolutely crucial, and that's why this is my number 2 route network building game of all time, Power Grid. And finally, my number 1, probably not a surprise to anybody else, number 1 route network building game, as far as I'm concerned, is Ticket to Ride. Ticket to Ride, designed by Alan Moon and published by Days of Wonder. This game is a classic. This is the gateway game par excellence. Now this game, I admit, I don't play the base game, the North America map, as much as I used to. I still like it because it's still, geographically speaking, my home. I'm from the United States of America, and it's what I'm most familiar with. However, I will say this, the slight and subtle nuances that are introduced in some of the other iterations, some of the other expansions, including even the cities, the small city boxes, are really, really cool, really neat, and add to what's already a great fundamental game. Now, I will say this is gateway. There's lots of games on this top 10 that I would overall rank higher than this game, but at the end of the day, the route network building is all that it's about. Yes, mechanically speaking, you're doing a little bit of rummy, you're drafting these cards, but what you are doing with those cards throughout the game is you're building routes. Route after route after route after route. You're trying to fulfill your destination tickets, which are like your missions, your scoring conditions, if you will. And linking specific spots on the board is very, very crucial to your ultimate goal of winning the game. Lots of cool, neat route network building in this game. It's absolutely all that takes place. So if you want a sample or a starting game to get the feel of what route network building is, Ticket to Ride is the game for you. My number 1 route network building game of all time, Ticket to Ride. And that's it, folks. Those are my top 10 route network building games. Please comment down below. Tell me what you think. Perhaps you feel like some of these games might not qualify. Perhaps you are appalled by the fact that some of these ranked as high or as low as they might have. Comment down below. Tell me what you think. Tell me what your favorite route network building games of all time are. Perhaps you're not very much a fan of the mechanism. I understand that that's the case. I'm curious to read what you guys have to say. This is Harry from When Harry Met Board Games saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.